First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to honor the family's request and letting everybody know that this past week, the love and support that they've received has not gone unnoticed. They really appreciate it, and they're very, very thankful. I know right now Jonah is somewhere up there getting a kick out of this and smiling because he knows that I do not like crowds at all, much less speaking in front of them. So thank you. By now and throughout this week, most of you have heard a lot about who Jonah was and what he stood for, who he was as a husband, father, and officer. So forgive me if I sound repetitive, but it's my sincere hope that by the time I am done speaking, I help you have a better ingrained image and understanding of who Jonah Oswald was. Officer Jonah Oswald, husband, father, friend, police officer, leader. He was brave, selfless, honorable, respectable, talented, and skilled. Those are a few words to describe who he was. What do you say about an individual who was such a living example of integrity and righteousness? An individual who changed lives on a weekly basis without even realizing it. Jonah would not want me to stand here and tell you that he was perfect, but he would want me to stand here and tell you how he tried. Born in California, and through a series of events ended up in Kansas City with his wife, Hannah, who he loved very much. Jonah would take on the challenge of moving out here by picking up every job and any challenge that he could, knowing the goals that he had set for himself and for the family, and knowing what it took. He would tell Adam. That's what Jonah would do, always did. I always knew who he was working for. Yes, he loved being in uniform and he loved serving, but I always knew because he made it clear that he worked hard in order to provide for his family, which is how we initially bonded. His passion for the job, coupled with his love and devotion for his family, was honorable and commendable, and mirrored my views and values. Our combined love for the job became the center of what would turn out to be one of the greatest friendships I've ever experienced. Such a rare friendship that you just do not find these days in the world that we live in. Jonah was a devoted officer who truly embodied what going above and beyond meant. I witnessed him more than a few times drive a young lady to safety after being a victim of domestic violence. He did not mind, as long as it meant that that young lady was far from chaos, even if it was for the night. First to a call and always listening to his radio, eager to help and solve whatever problem might be presented. He was so quick to calls that I even had to apologize to a neighboring agency sergeant one time for showing up to the call first. On this occasion, a bar fight had broken out in a neighboring city. I had staged in the area nearby at a gas station because the agency hadn't requested for assistance yet. And I see headlights coming up from behind me, and there goes Jonah, speeding by. Well, I put my car in drive and I followed him, and we were there first, on scene. That was Jonah. On another occasion, I responding to a neighboring agency's armed disturbance. The suspect had fled the apartment with a handgun. I arrived in the area and immediately witnessed a subject partially matching the description in a parking lot over. I put him at gunpoint, called out my location since I was alone, and I swear to this day I still hear Jonah's tires screeching as he was coming in behind me. I'm glad he stopped. He was coming in hot. I realized I had the wrong subject because out of my peripheral, I saw the actual subject running through the wood line. Well, I took off after him. Jonah hadn't seen him, though. And when I took off after him, he followed me, not questioning me. He followed me, trusting that I knew what I was doing. The subject was taken into custody, and we found a gun dumped in the woods promptly after that. Jonah was a devoted husband and father. He enjoyed taking trips with his family and making time for his family where he could. Often I see him making time on duty to speak with Hannah and FaceTime her and the kids, either to say goodnight or whatever the topic was for the night. Often he'd talk about how much he wanted to be more available for his family. More often than not, in the rare occasion that Jonah had a full set of days off, he would tell you how he had made some time for his family, either by watching a movie or taking Hannah out on a date. He enjoyed it. That's who he was. He would voice how blessed he felt to have Hannah by his side and in his life. He would voice that Hannah was too good for him while smiling, and I knew that he meant it. Jonah was a devoted friend, always willing to help. Did not matter what the task was. Even if the task involved moving me into my new apartment. Jonah did it with a smile on his face and didn't ask for anything in return. Instead, asking me what else he could do to help me get settled into my apartment. Jonah always knew your birthday, and yes, that would come with a gift. But not just any gift, it was always a meaningful and thoughtful gift. One year he gifted me a steel ice cube with the Texas flag sketched on it. Well, he knew that I loved whiskey, and he knew that I loved an ice cube in my whiskey. And he knew I loved the state of Texas. Jonah was such a devoted friend that at one point we even shared the same haircut. I have pictures to prove that. Jonah was not much of a drinker, but one night we decided to go out, just him and I, for a couple drinks. We initially arrived at an establishment, but quickly realized that we wanted to go elsewhere. But we also realized we hadn't had dinner yet, so we stopped at McDonald's. And at the time, McDonald's was selling the McRib. So Jonah and I got the McRib. I got a Dr. Pepper, fries. I think he had a Coke. We knew we didn't want to sit in the parking lot. We knew that we didn't want to go inside. So we found a parking lot nearby at a gas station. We left the music on, and we sat there and ate our McRib, fries, and Dr. Pepper and Coke. Little did I know at that point that would become one of his most favorite memories of us. He would always ask me, "Do you remember the time that we sat in a gas station parking lot and ate McDonald's?" How can you forget that? It was a great memory. It showed me how simple of a man he was. He just wanted to be around his friends and family, people that he cherished. That's what meant the world to him. And I'm honored to have been a part of that memory. Jonah enjoyed smoking cigars with me. Sorry, Hannah. Melting silver and reshaping it. Creating beautiful and practical knives, which he was planning on putting up for sale. Playing the piano, video games, you name it. No words can describe the amount of talent and skill Jonah possessed. If he put his mind to it, you could bet he was going to get it done and get it done correctly. That's who he was. Not long after I met Jonah, he embarked on a fitness journey. But I'm not just talking about lifting and running. I'm talking about calorie counting, bulking, and cutting cycles. He would look forward to his bulking cycles because it meant he could eat more calories and lift heavier weights. But when he was on his cutting cycles, you just wanted to leave the room. Jonah would literally torture himself by sniffing treats, cakes, cupcakes, and any other sweet that might be around the station throughout his 10-hour shift. By hour 9, you just wanted to hold him down and shoved the cupcakes down his throat. Jonah would also purchase sweets for the house and have Hannah hide them throughout the house so he would not binge. Jonah would promptly turn around and harass Hannah, though, in the most loving way, in order to get her to disclose where the treats were hidden. When he would then binge on his sweets, he would get in the fetal position and lay on the couch because he was so painfully full. Or he'd walk around and call himself disgusting and chubby while pacing back and forth and grabbing his fat. Both Jonah and I understood the risk came with and what it calls for. That understanding strengthened our bond. Jonah would not want to be remembered as a man who loved life. He would want to be remembered as a man who loved life and serving others. A man who gave without thinking twice about it. A man who loved his family beyond measure. Jonah was a fearless and selfless individual. He would not want us to be paralyzed or intimidated now. That's not what he would want, because evil is still out there. And he would want us to continue to fight. Jonah would have wished for us to, yes, cry, yes, be sad, sure, honor him, but come morning, strap our boots back on and get back into fight. That's what he would want. Continue to protect and serve. So that is what I'm going to do in order to honor him. Jonah was a committed husband and provider, a loving and honorable father, an invaluable friend, and he was my brother. I would encourage everybody to take the time to understand how Jonah lived his life and the way that he went about it. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. He made me a better man, and I know that he's made other people better around him, whether he realized it or not. He was young, but boy, he was ahead of his years. I would encourage you to never lose your sense of humor. He was a funny man, and it was welcomed, even when you didn't know that it was welcomed. I would encourage everybody to take a page out of his book, that book being his life, because it's a book worth reading. Thank you.